I'm Ryan with DragonCon TV, standing here with John Picasso here in the art show, and he is this year's artist guest of honor. So tell me, this isn't your first year at DragonCon, is it?
No. I think my first Dragon Con's 2001, back in my rookie days. The con was very good to me even back then. I mean, it's a different show back then. There were a lot of major science fiction fantasy authors from like the 60s and 70s back then who were showing up as sort of legends in that era. And I got to meet a lot of those guys, and it ended up turning into some of my early gigs in science fiction fantasy publishing. And that was kind of unusual, but it was really pivotal for me. I think at that first one, I was nominated for something called the International Horror Guild Award. That doesn't even exist anymore. But it was just like a real confidence builder, this show, that one. And then a number of years go by, and then I ended up coming here for like maybe 2012, 2013, 14. And that's where I meet some of the people who are now currently staff. And they were just very, very kind. But, you know, life takes you in different directions. And I hadn't been here in a while, but they came to me and said, would you like to be artist guest of honor? Because I guess obviously the career had gone pretty well at that point. And so I'm just glad I'm here. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, what is that? 2001, 2002, 23 years. It's a long time, but happy to be here.
Well, just like at Olive Garden, when you're at DragonCon, you're family.
Pretty much.
So you really, the early 60s and 70s really inspired you. Tell me about your favorite artist.
Favorite artist? I guess from that era, I mean, a lot of people are going to say Frank Frazetta, I guess. I know that one must come up. I find more and more lately that Moebius actually is one. And I wouldn't even consider Moebius a 60s or 70s era. Moebius is a pretty important one for me.
Speaking of Moebius, can you tell us what you're doing with Dune this year?
That's a good segue right there, boy. It's actually something that's going to be revealed here at the show. I hadn't talked about this online, but I'm about to do a new edition of Dune for Easton Press out of Boston. And this is a publishing house that does some very, very boutique leather-bound hardcovers, a little bit pricey, but these are going to be fully illustrated by me, these new Dune editions. And it's kind of part of a lineage of really beautiful hardbacks that this company's been doing for decades. So it's kind of a big deal to me that I actually am one of the people that gets to do a limited edition of Dune, especially one for this company that's such a prestigious outfit. So the first image that I've done for that book is actually on display here, first time ever. And I've never even talked about doing this online, but I'll be talking about it at this show tomorrow at the Art of Dune panel. So yeah, just good timing, you know, but it worked out.
You heard it here, folks, a DragonCon TV exclusive.
There you go. There it is.
What'd you think of the Dune movies?
I love them. I love what Villeneuve has done. I mean, I know my vision of it is, you know, it's one of those things where you see what Moebius has done, you see what all these great artists have done, and I think the whole thing is, what do you bring that hasn't been brought before? And it's very tough to think in terms of content how you're going to do something different, but I think in terms of how you frame those visuals for the audience, how you frame the way that the pictures interact with the words, especially when you're having the words being read alongside your illustrations. I think that you can always look at it and see if there's a fresh way. One of the things that I tend to do with my illustrations is I try to write between the words. And what I mean by that is there's always like the scenes that are happening throughout a story, throughout a fictional narrative. And I try to never illustrate the scene that's being described. I try to write between the sentences. So like whatever the sentence says and the next sentence says, think about the moment that happens between those sentences. Illustrate that rather than just illustrating the sentence that is being described or the scene that's being described in the sentence. If that makes any sense to y'all. I know that was a little convoluted, but I'm telling you, if you kind of ride between the beats when you're illustrating,
the space between the lines, yeah, that's what's not being said.
Exactly. It tends to have more life beyond just, you know, spoon feeding the audience.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You definitely it's a working relationship. You want them to take away what they see that you wanted them to see, but also what you didn't expect them to see.
Right. Well, the words and the pictures need to have a conversation. So that's important. And I think any artist who's worth their salt, they can bring something fresh in that way. So that's what I'm trying to do. And we'll see if the fans agree once I'm done with it. But I've only done one piece, so, you know, we'll find out.
Well, speaking of inspiration, I get the sense that they cast the characters in Game of Thrones based on your artwork. Is that correct?
There's a little bit of that, for sure. Absolutely. So it's a long story, but I'll give a short version for you guys. So basically, in 2008, I guess I'm at the Worldcon in Denver. I walked up to George R. R. Martin at a party and said, hey, well, I used to have a portfolio that I used to keep under my arm back in those days. And so I had this portfolio and I said, hey, I'd love to show you some pictures, but not right now. I'll show them to you later. He said, don't worry, John, I already know who you are. And I was like, how do you know who I am? I've never met you. He says, and he just starts rattling off all these covers. And I said, well, that's amazing. And so I walked away with my friends thinking that was the coolest brush off I've ever seen in my life. Turned out the next year he comes to me at the same convention in a different city in Montreal and says, let's go finish that conversation that we were going to start at that party, which we didn't even have a conversation, but he remembered that meeting. And he says, how would you like to do some illustrations based off my book characters from A Song of Ice and Fire? And I said, let's do it. And it turned out instead of being book covers, it was illustrations for a calendar. And it ended up being that I was going to be the first illustrator for this series of calendars that were going to be based off his books. So I did these book illustrations. And what I didn't know, though, is that they were being funneled to the producers for HBO as they were starting to cast the show Game of Thrones. So my illustrations, especially for Bran, for Arya, for Robb, if you look at those, you can see definitely a resemblance between my work and the actors. But it's not like my work was copying the actors. It was kind of the show looking at my work and saying, maybe this is the way we should go with the visual look of these characters. So worked out that way. It wasn't by design, but give George and the show all the credit for how that all turned out. But yeah, it's nice to unwittingly be tied into that. But I always consider myself a Song of Ice and Fire artist, not a Game of Thrones artist, but I do have a relationship because of that.
That's got to be like a total game changer.
It was. I mean, that opportunity. I mean, I guess I kind of went to George looking to work with him. I just didn't expect that perfect storm moment. You never expect a perfect storm to happen, but it just worked out that way, and I just wanted to work with him as a fellow creator. But the fact that my work kind of converged with the coming of this show that became like a cultural phenomenon, things happen. So
what can you tell me about the card game Loteria?
Yeah, so Loteria is basically Mexican bingo. I'm 100% Mexican American, so it's me taking something that I've kind of grown up with, sort of this cultural icon, and taking these 54 images from this card game and trying to make it so that Loteria isn't just a Mexican or Mexican American thing, but it's an everybody thing. And I sort of take these very sort of, I wouldn't call them mundane images, but they're very simple, iconic card artworks. And I take them and sort of do them in my own fantastical way. And so I'm about halfway through that series right now. And the idea is that I wanted to originally do them just as little card icons and as my own interpretations. But as things happen, as you're drawing these things, you realize you're telling yourself little stories in your head, like lullabies about each image. And I started writing them down because I have a lot of writer friends who say, you know what, start writing that stuff down. That might be a book. And it looks like it might be turning into that. And that's not something I talk about a whole lot. I might mention a little bit here at the show when I'm doing my guest of honor panel, but the cards are officially what I'm doing with it. But yeah, eventually there's going to be a book of this stuff too. And it will have story and it will be me. And it's my way of sort of not only paying back to my culture, but it's the idea of bringing my culture to people who aren't Mexican or Mexican American, and hopefully making them feel like, hey, this belongs to you as well. I'm sharing it with you. And I think that's part of the next evolution of representation. Is I don't want to just represent as a Mexican American. I want to be able to make our culture be something that can be part of the sort of the wellspring of story for the whole world. That's what I'm trying to do. A little bit lofty there, but you got to start somewhere. Yeah. And that's where I'm kind of going with Loteria.
Well, it's a beautiful way to introduce something that no one may have ever discovered on their own.
Yeah, that too, for sure. Yeah.
And I would like to thank you on behalf of Dragon Con for showing up and just gracing us with your beautiful artwork.
Oh, thanks, man. Appreciate it very much. Thanks so much. Nice to be here.